I'm Peter Austin, that is the 817AA Sentry box, and this is interesting. When I first started scripting this video, I thought I'd just be telling you about this quaint little box that sits by the road in a quiet English village. It was erected in the last century along with hundreds of others right across Britain, but it's now one of only a dozen that still survive today. And no, it's not just a pretty phone box, if that's what you're thinking. But once I started looking into the history of these things and the well-known organisation that installed them, I found myself going down the most fascinating historical rabbit hole that I've come across in a very long time. This is the totally unexpected history of the AA Cycle Scouts. I might go somewhere else and just show you some B-roll, I think. So firstly, what exactly is this thing? Well, the best way to answer that question is to tell you more about the organisation who put it here. When I called this an AA sentry box, that's not just some random string of letters used to identify it, I literally mean the AA. No, not Alcoholics Anonymous, but the Automotive Association, a motoring club and insurance company that's been a household name in Britain for the best part of a century. And actually, just while we're on the subject of confusing acronyms, when the organisation was first set up on the 19th of June 1905, it was initially called the Motorists Mutual Association, or MMA, an acronym now associated with mixed martial arts, and then within a week, the members voted to change the name to the Automotive Association. I just hope they hadn't ordered any of the stationery yet. But in any case, the reason the motoring club was set up in the first place was because at the time, early car owners were incredibly unpopular people. Their noisy engines startled the horses that most road users were still reliant upon, and they left an awful lot of dust and noxious fumes in their wake. But more to the point, auto drivers weren't just unpopular with other road users, they were persecuted by the police as well. In the late 1800s, cars were classed as locomotives. The speed limit was just 4 miles per hour, and every automobile had to be preceded by a footman walking just a few feet ahead, holding a red flag to warn other road users of its approach. Police often hid out of sight in hedgerows and such, trying to catch speeding drivers, not unlike today, but a whole lot worse, and anyone found to be going just 2 miles an hour over the limit was liable to be fined the equivalent of 25 days' wages or put in jail for 4 weeks. It was in direct response to this that the MMA, or AA, was first established at the turn of the century, by which time the speed limit had gone up to a whopping 20 miles an hour. The AA are most known today for providing roadside assistance and car insurance, but their original workforce was a team of bicycle scouts who simply rode around designated areas, warning members of nearby police speed traps by throwing them a military salute. These cycle scouts sometimes even testified in court in favour of members who were on trial for speeding. And in one instance, when Scout William Jones swore under oath that member Herbert Johnson had been doing 16 miles an hour maximum, Johnson was convicted regardless, and Jones was charged with perjury. Fortunately, the AA stepped in and funded his defence, and he was later acquitted. Jones, that is. Johnson probably still had to pay the fine. But of course, the AA workforce would eventually evolve into something far greater than a group of bike-riding police saboteurs. And that's where our little piece of street furniture comes in. In 1912, the first of these boxes was installed at Newing Green in Kent to provide shelter for the local AA patrolmen in bad weather. By this time, the patrolmen were mainly there to provide mechanical and navigational assistance to members within their patch. As such, the boxes also housed a fire extinguisher, local maps, a small amount of fuel, some cleaning materials, and a first aid kit. And all AA members were issued with a key that allowed access to any AA sentry box, even if the local patrolman couldn't be found. And that's why these aren't phone boxes per se. Their original purpose was to provide shelter to the AA Cycle Scout and useful supplies to club members. Telephone or radio equipment was added to each box very soon after they were first introduced, though, allowing the patrolman patrolmen to contact HQ and send for assistance if required. Members were even permitted to use these phones to make local calls free of charge, though the technology was eventually converted so that it only provided a direct line to the AA. So that explains our little box. But what's all this about bicycle-mounted soldiers? Well, of course, a few years after the first of these boxes was installed in Britain, the First World War broke out in Europe. People from all walks of life offered up their services to the British war effort, and that included the AA. Members donated their vehicles, which were converted into ambulances and sent off to the Western Front in France, and the same was true of the RAC, another motoring association who, incidentally, had their own little roadside boxes. Not as pretty, though, in my opinion. More to the point, though, the AA patrolmen themselves also volunteered for the war effort on the basis of their cycling proficiency as well as their familiarity with engine maintenance. Over 100 of them enlisted, forming the 8th Cyclist Battalion of the Essex Regiment. It was really called that. Now, perhaps I'm just not as well versed in the history of the First World War as I should be, but this blew my mind when I came across it. I think when most of us picture World War I, we see trenches, quagmires and barbed wire, which is not a particularly bicycle-friendly environment. Fortunately, though, these boys weren't generally tasked with tootling across no man's land into a volley of bullets. Their primary use was in reconnaissance and communications. In many ways, outside of rough terrain, bikes were superior to horses. They were lightweight and quiet, they were more easily repairable insofar as they didn't need a vet, and they also didn't need feeding or stabling. A lot of cyclist units, including the AAs, actually spent much of the war at home aiding British coastal defence, but small groups were sometimes sent to support the active combat in Europe, and at least 20 AA patrolmen were sadly killed in action, amongst many more from other cyclist battalions. Today, when we think of the AA, we think of little yellow vans on the roadside and mechanics helping stranded drivers. But as we've seen, over 100 years ago, the very same organisation had yellow boxes on the roadside and mechanics who fought for their country from the saddle of a bicycle. I've been Peter Austin, and that was interesting.